Hello, everybody. Welcome to you from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to see people logging in from really everywhere. We're joining you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, from MIT Sloan School of Management's Executive Education Program. And this is the latest in our Innovation at Work webinar series, deep dive into a topic. Today, we're going to be talking about digital transformation and the family enterprise. And to help us learn about this topic, I am thrilled to be joined by two colleagues from the MIT Sloan School, John Davis, who's a senior lecturer in family enterprise and the faculty director of our Future Family Enterprise program, and Stephanie Woerner, who is the principal research scientist and executive director of the Center for Information Systems Research, known around here as CISR, at the MIT Sloan School. And we're going to have, I think, a fascinating and insightful and provocative conversation with John and Stephanie, which we hope will be very interactive as well. So as you were just invited to do, please in the chat window do continue to feel free to share any comments or ideas that are occurring to you as we're going through the presentations and the discussion. If you have any questions that you would like me to put to John and to Stephanie later on in the session, then if you could put those in the Q&A box by clicking the Q&A button, that will help us to sort through those and make sure we get to your questions. So comments in the chat, questions in the Q&A. Hopefully that's straightforward. So let me move on to briefly introducing John and Stephanie, and we'll hand over to them in a second. So John, as I mentioned, is a senior lecturer in the Family Enterprise Executive Program at the MIT Sloan School of Management. He also teaches in our MBA program. John is very modest about this, but really he is one of the, if not the founders of the field of studying family enterprises really internationally, very renowned in these circles, and we're just delighted that a few years ago he decided to join us at the MIT Sloan School, and I think he'll probably be sharing with you some of the reasoning that he thinks that the Sloan School and MIT is the place that is really enabling him to power ahead with this work in not only doing research but in helping family enterprises globally to address the challenges that they face now and going into the future. John is the author of highly respected books in this field. He's really a prolific researcher and teacher and aide and advisor to many companies around the world and to their senior executives and family leaders. John, welcome. Always a pleasure to get to share a stage with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your newest ideas. And John today is going to be joined, or is joined, by Stephanie Woerner. Now, Stephanie is principal research scientist at the MIT Sloan School of Management and also a director, or the director, of our Center for Information Systems Research. Stephanie also is a renowned researcher and speaker and co-author, most recently of a book titled Future Ready, The 4 Pathways to Capturing Digital Value and What's Your Digital Business Model, is also another title. So you can see a theme here. Stephanie is truly one of our experts in how digital technologies are and will transform really everything that we do, but in particular our businesses and organizations. And this most recent work of hers is also focused on what leaders in businesses and organizations need to do. And so the juxtaposition of a family enterprise focus from John and the leadership, technology change, digital transformation focus from Stephanie really is getting to the heart of probably what might be one of the biggest set of challenges that we know that we're all facing. And this being MIT, we're looking forward to not only hearing what the challenges are from our two experts, but also getting into a great discussion of what solutions that they're seeing, so that you will all be able to get something useful out of this session, as well as learning about our work here at MIT and hopefully continuing to engage with us. So with that, let me just say one more word about what we're hoping we'll get through. And what you might learn from this session. So we're going to cover the question of family businesses and how our experts here see them evolving into future-ready companies through digital transformation. That's going to be a very disruptive process, so we'll have some tips and some ideas on how you can manage the organizational challenges. And also, as I mentioned, particularly for the audience today, so interested in family enterprises, thinking about questions of governance and ownership in these processes, which perhaps we often don't think about those dimensions when we're hearing about digital transformation. But for you in this audience, we know that's ultimately what you're keen to learn more about. So with that, with another reminder, please feel free to put comments, ideas that are occurring to you during the session into the chat. Put your questions in the Q&A tab as they occur to you. I will come back in a little while once we've heard from John and Stephanie and help put your questions to them. But for now, let me hand over to you, John, and I will disappear for a while and be listening with the audience to what I know is going to be a fascinating presentation. John, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, very much. Thanks for this opportunity to not only to talk about this important topic, but to do this with Stephanie Woerner, whose work I greatly appreciate. I'll start here. We all recognize that for family enterprises, for family companies, family offices, family organizations of various kinds, the world is changing rapidly, and we're experiencing a great deal of what I call turbulence in the world. And in my role at MIT, I look at how the world is changing in all of these ways, and we could list others, and to try to understand how family companies, how family offices, how family philanthropy, how family social impact activities, et cetera, how the family itself needs to adapt in order to not only be relevant, but to succeed in these times. And one of the important recognitions that I've come to is that we are definitely in new times. This may, to some, feel like an extension of what has been developing over the past 20 years through greater automation and computerization of business processes and other things that we interact with. But in fact, we are in a new era. And we need to pay attention to how what I call the landscape of family enterprise is changing. And look, you close your eyes for any length of time and you open them again, and there's something about the world of family enterprise that has changed. Changed in terms of the business, changed in terms of the family, changed in terms of how we need to anticipate and adapt in a quickly changing and pretty volatile world, that where the volatility, the turbulence doesn't seem to let up. And one of the factors here that we pay very close attention to, and in part led me to leave my past teaching role at another business school and come down the river to be part of the conversation at MIT regarding how the world and business and technology and other things are changing on a very constant basis, but especially technology. I wanted to be part of that conversation and then to understand what you all need to do if you're going to adapt to a world that is decisively different than the era we just left. So we're going to be focusing a lot on technology, and my way of thinking about the world today is that these four forces, technology, of course, being a very prominent one, but not the only one, the environment, the state of globalization or deglobalization, which we appear to be in right now, and then what's going on in the socio-political economic world that each of us and our companies inhabit. And these four forces interact. A change in the environment, a change in technology, a new war, changes in society can pop up, but it's those changes tend not to directly and in an isolated way affect our business. It's through the interaction of these four forces that we're feeling the need to adapt. And there are lots of examples of each of these forces that we can recognize and track. But our goal is to understand how the world in general is changing and how that's going to affect the way we do business, our business models, how we're organized to do business, how we develop people, how we need to lead and govern and indeed own our companies in this changing world, and how we can, in all of these ways, get ready using our traditional strengths that still apply. So, for example, long-term thinking, long-term investing, long-term relationship building, I feel is still a pronounced advantage that family enterprise have an edge on. Our community engagement, our stakeholder loyalty and stakeholder focus, all highly important in this changing and new world. But in what ways do we need to change, adapt? This has guided my work at MIT. It is the foundation stone for the Future Family Enterprise Program, executive program that I lead at MIT. You'll have some information about it later. It's definitely on the minds of my clients around the world, and part of what guides my advisory work and my work helping families build the right approaches and resources so that they can still be successful. Now, these four forces and their interactions have affected society in a variety of ways, certainly affect our business organizations, and also affect enterprising families themselves. Today, we're going to be looking at how digital technology, one type of technology, but certainly pivotal in the lives of our companies and indeed just in our lives in general in society, how that type of technology needs to be addressed, and especially in our family companies. And when we ask, as I have in a 2-year research study that I've finished recently, when I've asked enterprising families, and particularly business leaders and family members who are highly engaged in their companies, what do you see out there? What forces really need to be are in your life, in your business, are really impacting how you do business and how you need to think about future success? These appear. And I've listed the top 5 and also number 8 because they also recognize in many ways that the climate and the environment and the ecosystem that we're in, planetary ecosystem we're in, are big factors. They're changing. We're going to need to adapt. But like all of us in various ways, they say it's really important to the world, but for us, it's number 8. But when we ask this important question, notice that digital advances and disruptions are way up on their list of things that they need to pay attention to, and rightly so. And when we ask, in general, given the things that you're noticing, given the turbulence that you're experiencing, given the kinds of forces of change that you think could create somewhere between moderate and transformative pressure to change how you do things, most everybody says there's a lot of turbulence, and somewhere between moderate and radical change is going to be needed for us to succeed in the future. That's very reassuring. But then when I ask, how ready are you for these important pressures to change? A minority, a distinct minority, say that they're very ready. And in my view, if a company doesn't say they're very ready, they're not ready enough. And so it's important that among the various pressures and forces causing us to rethink how we do things and to adapt to a new world, that we explore digital transformation, which again is one of the top, most noticed, and most appreciated forces in the world today that will force us to adapt. And this gives me the opportunity now to turn this over to my colleague, Stephanie Woerner, who is arguably the voice, the person who can explain what's happening and what we need to do about it. Stephanie?
Thank you, John. And yes, I think that you've laid out the issue really clearly. And what I'm hoping this talk today is going to do, at least my portion of it, is going to start to give you an idea of a framework that can help guide your thinking toward how you have to transform your organization. And here at CISR, we do research on large global companies, but I can tell you, as part of the research for the book, we also looked at whether the framework was applicable to smaller companies. And we actually found very few changes, very few differences between the large companies and the small companies. The only big difference that we saw is that small companies were actually closer to their customers. And this is one area where large companies can learn from their smaller colleagues. What I'm going to do today is first lay out what we think a transformation is, which is going to explain why it is so hard. I'll then talk a little bit about what the future-ready organization looks like, the 4 pathways that we see to get there, and then really end with some of the disruptions that we see present in every transformation. And along the way, I'm going to use some examples from some family-owned businesses, because I think that that makes the most sense when we have John here, that we really try to have a real overlapping of our interests and our research. Next slide, please. So when we think about, at MIT CISR, a digital business transformation, we think about it in a distinct way from many, many people. When I'm in executive education and I turn to the audience and say, what is digital business transformation? Often what I get is digitizing work, automation, creating end-to-end processes. And what I want to get across to you is that is one part of a digital transformation. One part is around digitizing. It's about operational excellence. And that transformation involves discipline around your back office processes. So that means that you are simplifying your processes. You're looking for the one best way to do something, automating, and then focusing on reuse and productivity. And I think that a lot of companies, this is the way that they think about how they're going to use digital technologies. But I think they're missing a real opportunity, because the other part of a digital business transformation is around digital. It's around using digital to innovate and empower people to experiment and create digital offerings that are going to engage and delight your customers. And as well, when you get further along, typically that same innovation is actually going to be used for operational excellence. Eventually, what we want to get to is a point where we have some synergies. But this is why digital business transformation is so challenging. It's because you're being asked to do two things at one time. And this is what you're going to need to do to succeed in the digital economy. You'll need to digitize around operational excellence, and you'll need to use these digital technologies to delight your customers. Next slide, please. So when we put this together and we think about what it takes to create a future-ready enterprise, we see one dimension around being operational efficiency. So this is around, as I said before, increasing your automation, standardizing, focusing on reuse, and really measuring your productivity. And then the other dimension is a customer experience type of dimension, where you're really increasing your customer focus. And when we put those two together, you can look in the upper right-hand quadrant at what we define to be a future-ready company. And those are companies that are ambidextrous. They are actually simultaneously pulling out costs on one side, and then they're innovating on the other side. And again, I want to really, acknowledge that this is really hard. I was in a session yesterday where I had one executive say, "But wait a minute, don't you really have to cut costs and really stop your innovation while you're looking at your productivity?" And I had to acknowledge and say that's what companies have typically done. But to really succeed moving forward, you've got to have to figure out how to do both at the same time. Future-ready companies have a great customer experience, and really importantly, they're modular and agile. The very best companies are creating components. They're figuring out what it is they do best, and they're creating those components, and then they're putting them together kind of like Legos. And so you may have an end-to-end process, but you're going to have components along the way kind of click together so that you create that end-to-end process. And that modularity becomes very important for two reasons. One is it's important for efficiency, because then you can reuse that component. And it means that you're going to be saving in terms of development costs. Also, at the same time, becoming more modular means that it gives you opportunities to create offerings for your customers. And in some cases, when you have a really forward-facing customer process, this is going to actually help with your customer experience, because the more that you reuse, the more predictability your customers are going to have. Future-ready companies are really figuring out how to dynamically partner. And we're talking about moving beyond the partnering where you have really complicated agreements and you have to do some heavy duty integration. We're really talking about using APIs, kind of frictionless type of partnering. And the reason that you have to think about doing that is that most companies can't do it themselves. They can't do it all themselves. So for instance, if you needed to do something with a location, why would you go out and develop a mapping API when you can go and purchase something like that from, say, Google Maps? Or identity management. There are companies out there that have identity management services that you could bundle into one of your offerings. Same with payment services. And then finally, in future-ready companies, data is a strategic asset. And this is one of the hardest parts of a transformation, is taking and consolidating your data so that you are able to actually leverage that data and create value from it. About 22% of the firms that we looked at in our 2019 survey were future ready. Some of those were large companies, and some of those were small, born future-ready companies. I have some new data. We have a new survey that's just come out, and so after the first of the year, we'll be updating all of these results. Where we see most companies is in a place we call silos and spaghetti. And these are companies typically product-driven. They have products, the products are very good, but what has happened is over time, a company will start with one product, create a number of processes around that product, and then have another great idea. And with that great idea, they start another set of processes around the new product. And then they look at their systems and say, you know what, we've got to share data or something from one product to another product. And so they create point-to-point solutions. And eventually, over time, what you end up with is a bunch of silos, typically around products or services, and then all of these point-to-point solutions, and it looks like a plate of spaghetti. And so that's why we call it silos and spaghetti. And these are companies that have this complex landscape of processes, systems, and data, and they're still working. And often they're working because they have great people who are performing via heroics. And then we see some companies, often manufacturing companies, who have really focused on that operational efficiency dimension, where they've really gone deep into it, creating a platform. They're service enabling their crown jewels. That means that they then have plug and play products and services. They've really worked to identify one best way to do each key task, and ideally will then create a component around it. And they've consolidated their data. About 7% of companies have actually put the discipline together to be in this quadrant, especially along the far end of it. Other companies, often retail and to some extent banking, have looked and said, we have high threat in the environment and we have to engage our customers. And so the first thing that they do is really put into place some customer initiatives. And really the first thing that they do is they realize that customers don't like having to hop from one silo to another silo. And so they put a wrapper around all of their silos and spaghetti so that it looks like you're dealing with one company. But in the background, there's still that complexity. I'm doing some banking for my father. And believe me, I have just found out, you know, I'm peeking behind the curtain. It's really a mess with the banking that I'm doing with my father. Companies that do this well have a strong design and user experience, and they often start with mobile, and they end up with a rich mobile experience. About 20% of companies are there. Next slide, please. So how do you get to future ready? We've identified 4 pathways to getting to future ready. I wish I could say I was a marketer and that I had great names for each pathway, but I don't. So we're going to go with 1, 2, 3, and 4. So on pathway 1 is where you industrialize first. So this is a pathway that a company like Tetra Pak undertook, really focusing on putting into place end-to-end processes, really consolidating their data so that they ended up with master data and a master data strategy. And this pathway takes time. You have to think ahead of time about what your platform is going to look like. And it's a difficult platform for the company, especially in the early days. You'll see in the pathway 1 that it's a very shallow, it's kind of like a hockey stick. And before you have the uplift, it's very shallow. And it's a difficult pathway for some companies because there are no rewards early on. We call that the digitization desert. And because of that, a lot of companies start this pathway. This makes a lot of sense to them. They're going to focus on operational efficiency. They're going to They're really going to try to get all of those productivity gains. They know how to measure productivity, but because they don't have any customer gains from it, often the business unit leaders come to the people running the transformation and say, we can't keep doing this. We've got to go and engage our customers. And this is often in the early days when this kind of transformation can fall apart. So if you're going to succeed on a pathway 1 transformation, you really have to lay out what the goal is. And often you have to say to your business unit leaders, here is a certain amount of investment for engaging your customers, for delighting your customers. But as you do that, you have to make sure that it's going to fit and be able to be integrated into this platform that we have. And companies that are strategic about looking ahead and thinking about what they're trying to get to and are addressing their business unit leader needs can then get past that digitization desert. As you move upward, you then are able to start to rapidly innovate off of that platform. So this is where Tetra Pak is now. They did hit a point after that digitization desert where they're going, yep, we've got these productivity gains, but their customers came to them and said, do you know how hard it is to do business with you? And at that point, Tetra Pak has a great platform and is able to say, let's start looking at customer-focused end-to-end solutions. And so you start to see that rapid innovation kicking in at this point on a pathway 1. On a pathway 2, these are companies often, not always, but often, that are facing a difficult competitive environment. Often there is challenges about keeping your customers. There are challenges about competitors coming in. And on this pathway, the leadership says, we've got to engage those customers and kind of get buy-in. So they will start with customer experience initiatives. Now, this is the pathway that Cemex took. And I think that it's interesting to think about a cement company, a large, very successful cement company, deciding to focus on customer experience. But their new CEO, Fernando Gonzalez, who came in 2016, I believe, looked at the environment and said, you know, if we can do something about our customer experience, which was not very good, we can actually leapfrog the competitors and really create a sustained competitive advantage. So I would say that Cemex was a company that did not, their competitive threat was really off into the future, possibly. What they were really doing was looking at a competitive advantage type of play. And so they put into place, they looked around at the cement business and said, who's our end customer and what's their experience like? And they decided to focus on the job site manager. Job site managers, it's a difficult job. You're trying to coordinate lots of companies coming to your job site. Often, if you want to make changes, you have to leave the job site. You have to go to the little trailer off at the end, and that's how you make your changes. And Cemex said, you know what? If we develop a digital suite that streamlines the job site transactions and interactions, we can make a really big difference. Now, it put a lot of pressure on Cemex because they also had to make sure that their supply chain could be made more transparent. But it was tremendously successful, and they had huge global adoption, I think about 90% within 12 months. Now, one of the things that Cemex did that a lot of companies don't do is you can see that at some point on a pathway 2, you have to turn the corner and focus on your platform. So a lot of companies, they do their first customer experience interaction, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And they get a customer experience uptick, and it's like, let's do another one. And then they get more uptick, maybe less than the first one, but more. And then they say, let's do another one. And if you're not careful and you're not looking at your cost to serve, you can end up way back down in silos and spaghetti, creating more complexity. What Fernando Gonzalez did that was very important is he said, it's successful. We have global adoption. We're going to stop right now, and we're going to spend the time to integrate it into the re-platforming. We're going to re-platform. We're going to integrate Cemex Go into our back-end systems. And it was a difficult 12 to 18 months where they're really focusing on making that integration work, but they had the discipline to stop and know that that's where they were going to get the value in doing that. And so in this pathway, you really want to make sure that you have a traffic cop. But in some ways it's very good. There's a lot of test and learn that you can do early on in pathway 2. Pathway 3, a lot of companies look and say, well, you know, I have some ideas of some operational efficiency initiatives that we could do, and we have some around customer experience, and it feels safer to do a more incremental focus with stair steps. In doing that, they're really toggling back and forth between operational efficiency and customer experience. You can look at a company like Nordstrom, where they're implementing a strong omni-channel platform. And what they're doing in that omni-channel platform is integrating capabilities across 2 big brands, Nordstrom and Nordstrom Rack, and they're integrating across their physical and their digital channels. And so those are, and it's really very clear, these stair-step moves that they're making. And what they have done very well is have a roadmap. This is one of the key things that you have to have with the Pathway 3, is to have a series of initiatives, typically 6 to 9 months, create the roadmap so that everybody in your company knows where you're going. In part, this alternating focus can be difficult for both governance purposes and for your employees. And then you dashboard to keep track of it. And the important part along there is using those kinds of mechanisms to synchronize, because otherwise you're going to lose your learnings from one step to the next. And then the fourth pathway, often a lot of companies like throw up their hands and say, we can't get there from here. We need to build a future ready company. Sometimes they do it because their systems are they're so mired in silos and spaghetti that they really can't make any progress. Other times they have an idea about where they want to go, and starting a brand new business unit is the best way to go. So this is what Bancolombia did. Very successful bank, family run in Colombia. But they decided that they needed to experiment with digital banking. And so their innovation lab set up a digital bank, Neki. And with that, they had an opportunity to test out some of these digital things and then learn. But what Bancolombia did that was so important is they actually thought about how they were going to bring those learnings back into the main bank early on. They did not wait to see if Bancolombia was going to be successful or not. And this is one of the big issues in a path forward that you have to deal with, which is, what are you going to do if you are successful? So you want to be really thoughtful. Are you going to integrate back in? Are you going to have 2 separate business units? Or are you going to spin it out? And what you don't want to do is end up accidentally with 2 separate business units, each doing the same thing and creating more complexity. Next slide, please. Well, along the way, there are going to be what we call the explosions. And these are these big, important disruptions that every company has to get through. So for instance, the most important, we think, at least in getting started on your transformation, is, do you have your decision rights in place? Are you getting the right people to lead your key decisions? And one of your most important decisions is going to be what versus how. Who's going to decide what gets done? And then the next is, how is it going to get done? This is a huge challenge for a lot of companies. And it's quite difficult for a lot of senior leadership, because a lot of times what happens is In the past, what and how have been coupled together. And now with digital, you're decoupling it. And so senior leadership, the heads of the companies, are all going to typically keep the what, but they have to get comfortable with pushing that how, how the work gets done lower into the organization. That's going to lead me to the next big disruption, which is new ways of working. What we're finding with digital is that it becomes so important to use data and to make decisions based on data. You need to bring the customer voice in. There are agile methodologies that are more around test and learn. But this is so important because this is how you're going to change your culture. Changing your culture relies on changing your habits, and new ways of working does that. The third big challenge that a company has is, how do you connect your organizational silos? And this is where you need to really develop a platform mindset. This idea that you're going to create components, that you're going to reuse those components, that you're going to connect, you're going to use APIs so that you have more frictionless sharing, and that you need to reduce your spaghetti. And then the final big disruption is, are you going to do organizational surgery or not? Are you going to reorg your company? And to what extent are you going to do that? So, and this is around reducing organizational complexity. This is the one big disruption that I think leadership has, they have a choice there. If they have enough time and they can be more evolutionary, the organizational surgery will happen over time and kind of fit into the whole transformation journey. Sometimes you do have reorganizations that are huge and they kind of blow up and you need to bring the organization back together. A lot of companies we see wanted to start with organizational surgery. They wanted to reorganize. And we argue that that's not the best place to start, that if you start with a reorganization, organizational surgery, you run the risk of putting into place something that's really not right for where you're going to get to. And so it's better to start with identifying and getting the decision rights first, and then working on new ways of working and platform mindset. And then a little bit further on, start looking at where you need to reorg or not. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John to kind of bring this back into the family business.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. And we can see through Stephanie's examples of family companies that the kinds of important decisions, the kinds of important changes that are needed to really integrate on both of these dimensions. And what we will probably all agree to is that these important changes are certainly implemented by management, but I would argue that in today's world, it's the owners, or it's the owner managers thinking like owners, that really are needed to drive and support these kinds of big directional changes. When you think about owners, they come in lots of flavors, but the type of owner, family owner, that really drives important changes and growth are what we call active owners. These are owners, often they work in the business or are on the board, but not exclusively. We've seen active owners that have important perspectives and help the ownership group make the important bets that they need to make for the future. And those important bets come in these 5 different forms. The first, where are we going? It's very akin to do we want to be a future-ready organization in our industry? Are we going to diversify out of our industry? Can we play this game anymore and become really good at the requirements of digitalization and digitization that are in front of us. So on the investment side, on the capital side, where are we going to place our big bets? On the people side, who do we need in key roles like the CEO role, or on our board, or advising our company on this theme or that theme? What kind of culture do we need here in order to be successful in the future? And how are we going to not only manage, but govern what we own? Active owners either make these decisions, or at the very least, they're accountable to make sure that these decisions are being made well. I would argue, with lots now of grounded examples, that, and including the examples you heard from Stephanie, that family companies that need to do digitalization and digitization well have important decisions to make in each of these 5 areas. And these important bets, I call them, gravitate up to the owner level because they're not insignificant. They're not insignificant economically. They're going to change the culture of what we do, how we do it. They're going to affect who we need on our board, the kind of governance and decision-making that we need to have, the kinds of capital bets that are required. These kinds of big bets naturally float up to the owners. So what we know in today's world is, and it's not just the digital transformation needs of companies, but a lot of other important bets of various kinds are needed today in order to stay relevant. And so owners, more than any time that I've been able to identify in history, owners of companies today are really required to be very good and to be prepared to make these bets. And so the development of active owners with the right kind of perspective are required now more than ever before for a family company to be successful. How do owners affect or encourage or support digital transformation? Well, first of all, they elevate this to the kinds of issues that they are focused on, concerned about, and really prepared to do something about. They have their board and management teams develop what Stephanie referred to, what we call a digital roadmap. This needs to be consistent with where the owners think their company needs to go and their important values. And they need to make sure that they, through their board and through some direct conversations with management, are really tracking how this is going. And they need to instruct their board that really works with the management of the company to build a change-ready culture, one that is experimental, that tries things, and one that is building the lessons from their experience constantly back into their future plans. The board, a good board, is really important in these kinds of big change efforts. And the change not only includes, of course, building the technology, building digital literacy, even understanding conceptually what this really means, and trusting in the digital tools that we develop in our companies, but also building the right kind of culture and skill sets in key people and key groups so that we can use the technology. The cultures that we see most supportive of these big changes in general, but digital transformation in particular, they're clear about what they're trying to accomplish. And also they get really clear about the kind of problems that they need to solve. These are high trust cultures that make it possible, encourage sensible risk-taking, we say, trying new things, asking questions, and understanding that the technology that we want to incorporate is not one that displaces lots of people from current jobs, but enables us at various levels to just do things in a better, more thoughtful, customer-focused, but efficient way. And that, of course, requires a culture of growth, a culture of experimentation, a culture of learning. The board needs to really be engaged, highly engaged in these important change efforts. And in this case, we would say a board really needs to define what we call the digital transformation thesis. What are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? How are we going to do it? And what kinds of investments in technology, in people, in learning, in organizational change do we need to make? They need to help plan, help fund, and certainly monitor the kinds of changes that are going on. And they need to help management build an agile culture. So boards can be as important, or probably more important today, good ones, boards that not only reflect the strategic vision and the important changes and improvements that the owners want, but really engage with management. One of the most important changes we've seen in business governance over the past 20 years, but it's accelerating, is that good boards used to say, let's pick the right leader, let's stand back, and we're here if you need us. Today, boards are saying, we're here, we're engaged, we're part of the dialogue here, we're going to help you create the kinds of changes needed to reflect the strategic direction that we've agreed we need in our company. So with that, let me stop. We still have some time for questions. Peter, back to you.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Stephanie. And maybe just looping straight in with some questions, a couple of themes I've seen, if I could put them together in the questions and comments that I think you could both respond to, have to do with both the investment question that you were both talking about, but also how does that change across the spectrum of different sort of kinds and scales of family enterprises that you've seen. So the two parts of the question are, what are the differences and similarities between smaller versus much larger examples that you've talked about, and what specifically, perhaps in terms of the overall scale of any particular enterprise, how big an investment are they actually making?
Stephanie, do you want to?
So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These are big investments, especially to really get to future ready. Now, part of it is going to depend on how much spaghetti you have. So, I mean, the more that you've actually worked on putting a platform into place, the less it's going to take. But certainly, I don't know exact dollar amounts, but I can tell you that you're going to be looking, at least in time, from we've seen as little as 3, and then for very large global firms, we've seen as long as 10 years. And so kind of figure that you're looking at sustained investment and major investment of over a good solid 3-year to 5-year period. And I'm going to have to do more research to look up dollar amounts, but it will be substantial.
Yeah, and I've seen the same. And I would say that because of these substantial commitments of capital and time, and because important relationships in the firm, in the company, are going to change when you go through this process. People that weren't so important before become more important. People that were central before are a little less central going forward. Things, relationships, power structures change with big efforts like this, which is why it needs to be driven from the top by the owners who say, we are committed to making this work. We want to make this work in a way that enables our people to do more, better, but it's going to happen. And this is not something that we're going to vacillate on, deviate from. And so the biggest impediment, the biggest challenge that I've seen in family companies is convincing the owners, convincing the top business owner manager that this is not a nice to do, but a vital to do, and something that they better make a long-term plan to accelerate this process and stay with it. Because there will be explosions, there will be setbacks, there will be learnings that you need to reintegrate. It's not an easy process, but it's also not something that we can avoid.
And I think I would add to that, that it is necessary that they stay involved, that they cannot just say, let's do this and I'll see you in 6 months.
Yeah, I'll see you on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
When all the problems are worked out. That's right.
Great. Thank you. And I think probably time for one more quick question, which, oftentimes in public companies and in the venture world, venture capital world, we'd see a lot of M&A kind of activity as being a method that companies would use to sort of drive change or to leap from one place to another. What are you seeing in the family enterprise space? Is there a lot of M&A activity, and what's your advice around digital transformation and those kinds of corporate actions?
Yeah, Stephanie, again, do you want to go first on this?
Sure. So with large companies, absolutely. So I can tell you that certainly with Cemex and with Nordstrom, you certainly did see maybe not huge acquisitions, but certainly acquisitions that were very important to moving things forward. Actually, through all of our transformation, a well-placed partnership or acquisition can really make a huge difference. And so I would not say it's only M&A. I would also say that there is a real opportunity here for partnering. For smaller firms, I don't have as much information on that, but for larger ones, absolutely, you're going to do some, you're going to make strategic acquisitions. You may do a large M&A. I see less of that. More, I see strategic acquisitions and then some partnering.
Yeah, thank you. And let me just add this as well, supporting what Stephanie just said, that in this world, you need to do a number of things differently and better in order to stay in the game. You don't, a very safe assumption to make by any ownership group or management team is that we don't know enough. Where we are today, we don't know enough. And somebody else out there probably knows better than we do about some things. And so the need for partnering in the broad sense that Stephanie described is there. And it's one of the big mindset changes, moving away from control and towards collaboration, that most family companies really need to adopt. And those, I'll say one last thing, those companies that get an edge in digitalization, that do the hard work of making these changes and building an organization that is future ready, are going to be in a much better place to acquire competitors and other firms that haven't done it. And so the acquisition potential, the acquisition power that family companies have that get in the lead on this is going to be significant.
Great, thank you, John. I think that's a very compelling note to end on. In fact, so John, Stephanie, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We've learned a lot, and if people watching this live or the recording would like to hear more from John and from Stephanie, they are both, as I mentioned before, very active educators in our executive education programs at the MIT Sloan School. John has a course coming up in early 2023 called the Future Family Enterprise Sustaining Multi-Generational Success. And I'm sure you can imagine a lot of these ideas. If you join that course, you'll have an opportunity to explore in a very hands-on way and learn more about that. So thank you, John, very much. And I don't know if we've got a slide also about some of Stephanie's teaching in MIT. Here we go. We've got the digital strategies for transforming your business, which we offer both live online on Zoom and also on campus at MIT. Speaking of omni-channel, there's in a small way some of our own experimentation there, and please do check out that course as well. We'd love to give you a chance to dive deeper with John and with Stephanie in their respective courses at MIT Sloan School. Thank you both again. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward also to seeing many of you again in our future Innovation at Work webinar series, as well as our LinkedIn Live events that we've been running over the last couple of years as well. Once again, thank you, John. Thank you, Stephanie. We really appreciate you sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your insights with us. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone online and hopefully some people on campus in the near future. And we're ready for that future, a little bit readier for the last hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you all.